We are all honored and delighted to be here. Traipsing in here is a perfectly insane thing to be doing this morning, Juliana. We thank you for your hospitality. I had no idea you had so many friends with cameras. And then when Mr. Turkey comes here from the Salt Lake Tribune, then you know you're really my goodness. What can we say? We've been working very hard on a possible campaign motto. And Gracie has been contributing some thoughts as of late. And it goes something like this: live free or die. I don't know if that's a key word. Jon Hunt's over here. It's a perfect guy, except he's missing the man from the end of his name. You know, it's an honor to be here. It's an intimidating and an intrepid experience, particularly when your daughter is lost amidst the sea of reporters and you have no idea what might come out of her mouth. We might sink our enterprise absolutely instantaneously. But I'm honored to be here with Mary Kay, who I hope all of you get a chance to meet and shake hands with, because she's the greatest human being I've ever known, period. And I'm delighted to be here with Gracie May, who celebrated her birthday yesterday, and she's 12 years old. 1 year until she's a teenager, and she's there will be no problem. Good sailing the whole way. And Liddy, what can we say about Liddy? Liddy has been trouble for your entire life. Not.
I gave him all his gray hairs.
And these two are part of our family of 7. We hope that you're able to meet all of them at some point. Juliana, if you're willing, at some future date, I've got a few more I'd like to bring. Thanks for your interest in what we're doing. I in particular want to thank those who are out as political activists. This is a remarkable state. I mean, this state speaks to political activism. This state speaks to what a lot of the world would like to be doing, but they can't. And I'm reflecting on this very thing, having spent 2 years serving our country in Beijing, 10,000 miles away. To do this kind of thing would be impossible. To get out on a street corner or in Juliana's living room and to talk out about issues would land somebody in deep, deep trouble. And I've got to tell you that when dissident voices would come into the embassy and be willing to sit down with the United States ambassador, not that it was me, but that I represented the American flag, you could see them get a little teary-eyed, because they knew that the United States stood for something. They knew that the United States stood for expanding democracy, liberty, freedom, and standing up for human rights. And for people around the world who are facing difficult circumstances in their countries and aren't able to speak out about them, that's safe territory for them. And I hope we're always willing to stand up and champion those issues. I think this election cycle is going to be an important one. They're all important. But I think this one is going to be particularly important because it's going to set the course for our spending, number one. And when you consider the fact that we have run up from $10.5 trillion to $14 trillion in a little over 2 years, you get a sense of what I'm saying? $14 trillion. I mean, if you want one soundbite that ought to be driving this next election cycle, it's 14 trillion with an exclamation mark behind it. To say nothing of the 52 trillion total that we have in debt, public and private. That means every family, every small business, every big business, every city, every state, and indeed our country, everybody's going through a deleveraging process. It's difficult and it's painful, and we've got to stay focused on a healthier tomorrow from a debt standpoint, from a spending standpoint. And I have no doubt about where all of these deliberations in Congress are going to get us. The Ryan Plan is talking about its own approach. The Deficit Commission, of course, had their own take. They're all good, and they're all extremely important. And in true American fashion, we're going to get to the finish line with some pretty, I think, hard-headed and bold ideas on spending. Why? Because our country's hit the wall, and everybody knows it. And because of that, I think every American is ready to take the tough medicine that will be needed going forward. But aside from the spending and the debt side, we have a real need to create jobs in this country. And aside from just the debt side of the balance sheet, we've got to focus on the revenue side of the balance sheet. We've got to earn our way out of this as well. And for a country that has everything going for it, I mean, let me tell you, from 10,000 miles away, let me just give you a sense of what you see sitting 10,000 miles away. China, top of the game. Everybody's feeling pretty good about life and pretty good about their future. Inexorable growth rates that go out forever, 8, 9, 10%. I mean, they can do no wrong. They own $900 billion of our debt. Total debt plus investments, $1.3 trillion in our country. I mean, they're giddy with pride. And then you take a look and reflect on our mood here in this country, and we're down. We feel that our hope has been dashed. We feel a little dispirited. Yet for every reason, we ought to be seeing the future a little differently because we still happen to be the envy of the world. When you talk to the business folks in China, and they're moving at such a rapid pace, it's hard to even comprehend what's going on over there unless you're on the ground. They still look to the United States, and they're inspired by what our business folks do, what our entrepreneurs do. They're inspired by our marketplace, the openness and the transparency of everything we do here. And you talk to the creative class in China, the filmmakers, the poets, the musicians, the people who are trying to break through, and they still draw inspiration from this country of ours. I already told you about the dissident community, how they feel about how America still inspires every corner of this world. And you sit there and you scratch your head and you say, we can do it in this country. We have done it before. We have faced times of difficulty and challenge in years gone by. And we can get our act together in this country. And it's all about creating that pathway for growth. It's about creating an environment in which we can refire our engines of economic growth and allow entrepreneurs and the creative class to do what they do best. We've done it over and over again in this country, and it's time we do it again. And it's going to take a good, hard look at tax reform. That's never an easy thing to do. We did it in my home state of Utah. People said, it's not going to happen. It's a heavy lift. We cut taxes at record levels. We reformed taxes. We lowered the rate. We simplified things. We embarked on regulatory reform. We got our own energy policy, a very unique approach to health care. All of these things can be done, but right now our focus has to be on spending, and it has to be on firing up our engines of growth. And that's going to take looking at our tax code. And it's going to take regulatory reform. And it's going to probably require what I think is the most exciting of all, perhaps, the lowest of low-hanging fruit, and that is to embark upon an energy revolution in this country. It's all there. We have all of the raw material, all of the capability domestically to begin firing that engine of growth that will take us into the future. It addresses a jobs and an economic growth issue, and it also addresses a very important national security issue when we're importing 60% of our oil needs from corners of this world that are dangerous and unpredictable. So the question is before all of us, and it will be, I think, during this election cycle, and that is, do we want a decade of lost growth? And I'm not sure any American wants a decade of lost growth. Or do we want to refire our engines of economic growth and create the environment that speaks to long-term economic vitality and American preeminence? That'll be, I think, the question before us. As for what we're doing, our little family, although by some measures a pretty large family, we're in the diligence phase. And we're visiting a few of the early states and the important organizing states and having, I think, some good conversations. And through it all, we're probably going to find ourselves into June, and we're going to make a decision about where we go from here. I'm feeling pretty good about where we are today. We have more work to do. And we hope that through it all, we have an opportunity to come back and establish deeper and more meaningful relationships with all of you. Because from what I've been told, it takes more than a handshake. It takes more than a single conversation. In fact, you might find people setting up tents right now.
They almost were this morning.
There you go. So we thank you for being here. The fact that you would take a perfectly good morning and give it to us is very heartening. And we are all honored by that. We know it's just a first introduction, but we hope we leave having gotten to know each other a little better. and then we hope we have some opportunities to return. So thank you all for allowing us to do this. And I'd love to take any questions, comment, or criticism, whatever you have.
You were talking about it, I heard on the radio last night. Recycling, what you're doing as a family, recycling, but also, what do you think that solar power, wind power, geothermal power, tide power, power from the water are our future, perhaps in the 21st century? I think you're being on the right note, but I wonder if you thought about this.
I don't know about the radio interview. I don't recall doing a radio
No.
interview.
I heard you on NPR.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Let me just say, everything you described will be part of our future. It's how soon we get there and what the conversion costs are. We have to be very realistic. I've already talked to some small business folks here today. We have to be very realistic about where we are today in our economic trajectory. It's a difficult and precarious moment from an economic development standpoint. And we need to make sure that as we convert into a new energy world, that we do it in ways that certainly allow us to take steps. We want to continue that trajectory, but also do it in ways that are affordable. So many of the technologies and the approaches that you mentioned are being looked at, they're being perfected, they're being refined, and it may take many years before we get to the point in time where they are cost efficient as compared to other forms like natural gas. So I think in the interim, a very important transitional product for this country is going to be natural gas. We have it in abundance, it's cheap, it burns cleanly, and it would allow us, if we were to backload much of our power needs, and I know from a manufacturing standpoint, probably 20-23% is already drawing from natural gas, but also from a transportation standpoint, beginning to convert our transportation needs to natural gas as well. We somehow, some way, have to address the oil issue. Well, all of the alternatives have to be on the table, but let's look at them from an affordability standpoint and an emission standpoint. Let's face it, we care about this land of ours. We care about the air we breathe. As I used to discuss with my friends and colleagues out in Utah, Theodore Roosevelt came to the state of Utah early on in his presidency. It was probably 1903. And he basically thanked the people of Utah for being good conservationists. A good Republican back at the turn of last century. Why did he say that? Because I think most people get the fact that we're passing down to the next generation right here. We're passing down this sense of humanity, who we are as people. And I think part of that is the way we interact and treat one another. I think it's our values. I also think it's our land. And we want to make sure the land and the air is better for the next generation than it was for us. So technologies will continue. Affordability will be key. And that affordability question will have everything to do with how quickly they are then commercialized. But let's all remember that we care about our land, we care about our air. It's a quality of life issue at the end of the day, and it's a health issue for many people.
I think we got home from China, so we're just getting our trash out.
But let me just say this about air. We've just moved from the most polluted city in the world. Yeah. And when Gracie would walk out the door to the bus to take her to school every day, the first breath of air would cause a cough. And you're reminded when you can't see across the street that there are some corners of this world, some of the major cities that we fear from an economic competitiveness standpoint, that have a lot of work ahead of them in terms of cleaning up their act and providing air quality that will make them world-class destinations. We're well ahead in that regard.
There must
Thank
be
you.
another question.
So what's that red flag up there?
Yeah, right.
Oh, no.
Governor.
Yes, sir.
What are your thoughts on the President's remarks about Israel and Palestine yesterday? I've got a joint venture over in Israel, and I've been there many times, and I know what he's faced, but I know that they're not going to accept it. I just wonder what your thoughts might be.
So let me shift from the Asia-Pacific region.
Well, let's drop down.
Let's start with this premise. And you don't have to go back to the Balfour Accord of 1919 or the events of 1947-48 to understand the historic context in which all of this is playing out. It's sensitive, it's difficult. These negotiations are going to play out over the long term. But let's recognize premise number one. Israel's an ally. Israel was our first trading partner. Remember that?
4% of our foreign aid.
Our first trading partner. So these issues are not new, particularly when you're back looking at the map pre-1967 war. And it probably means that we have to allow the process to play out based upon those who are sitting at the negotiating table. And to preempt that strategy by forcing an issue, that is going to take time. It may be that they get there at some point, but they have a lot of ancillary issues to work out in the process. They have issues between Fatah and Hamas. They have issues between the West Bank and Gaza. They have security issues. They have settlement issues. They have long-term economic viability issues. And they're all going to be worked out at the negotiating table over time. This issue would have been resolved a long time ago if it were that easy.
That's right.
So I think
Why are you trying to fast track that?
I think we have to defer. Well, it may be because of the UN vote.
Yeah.
It's hard to know. But let's let the negotiators who understand this best let it play out of the table. It's going to take a while. There's no doubt about that. But through it all, let's remember that Israel's an ally and a friend and our first free trade partner. And there's a lot wrapped up in all of that that would suggest that we have an historic relationship with them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
You had mentioned your intention to use natural gas as a intermediary resource while searching for other more eco-friendly fuel sources. When you talk about natural gas, you talked about shale research. Is one of your one of the concepts that you would be referring to? You know, because I believe it was in, I don't remember the article, but there was an article recently that was discussing this shale, that there's a lot of shale, even in the United States, that we have access to. But my question to you is, if this shale is part of your plan, what does it mean to the environment, especially in relation to the United States? Because I've been told that there can be some serious issues in terms of actually mining for this stuff and doing it in a way that is clean and efficient.
It's an excellent question. And we, as I mentioned before, we care about the environment. We need to be mindful of what anything does to the environment. But it's also important to note that the technologies that have been developed, you're not talking about technology 10 years ago. You're talking about a technology that is less invasive and approaches drilling and extraction of raw materials in a much different way. But let's face the fact that, there are trade-offs in all things, and people are going to have to debate the trade-offs. Governors and legislatures and people at the local level of government. But, unless we move in this direction, let's face the facts. 60% imported oil to fire our economic needs. People are yelling and screaming about paying, $4.50 or $5 a gallon. But let's be realistic about this. The real price for a gallon of gasoline is probably more like $12, $13, $14 a gallon. If you want to fully load what it costs to keep the sea lanes open for the importation of oil in dangerous parts of the world, the deployment of troops, and fully load all of the costs associated with getting it here, it's not $4 or $5 a gallon. It's a whole lot. It's a whole lot higher than that. So as we discuss domestic opportunities and the pros and cons of going after them, let's be ever mindful of where we sit today and what we're paying in terms of blood and treasure to maintain the energy status quo. I think it's unacceptable for most people. Thanks for the question. All right, thanks everybody. We appreciate you being here.